Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Paris Schutz has the evening off. On the show tonight,
inflation could turn out to be higher and more persistent than we expect.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell signals inflation could become a problem for the economy.
I think it's the neighborhood atmosphere of Lisle.
How businesses in Lisle are recovering from the pandemic. As Juneteenth becomes a widely recognized holiday, Chicago chef Eric Williams on what the day means to him and how he tries to honor it through his work. Geoffrey Bear on the newest skyscrapers and other projects that popped up during the pandemic in an all-new Ask Geoffrey. A preview of presidential portraits Barack and Michelle Obama. Visit Chicago, straight from the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery. Celebrating Alligator Records' 50th anniversary with one of its rising young stars.
And Brandis, I'm at the Morton Arboretum, this beautiful outdoor museum with a new sculpture exhibit right now is in the western suburb of Lisle, and like a lot of places in the burbs, it is a seller's market. We're going to speak with a realtor, somebody who recently sold her home, a couple of local businesses, and learn more about this gorgeous artwork behind me coming up. But for now, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. But first, some of today's top stories. June 19th, known to many as Juneteenth, is now a federal holiday. President Joe Biden today signed the bill recognizing the holiday that commemorates the emancipation of African-American enslaved people. Vice President Kamala Harris spoke at the bill signing.
We must learn from our history, and we must teach our children our history, because it is part of our history as a nation. It is part of American history.
And we'll have more about the legacy of the holiday later in the program. One way Chicago will be celebrating the holiday is lighting up the skyline. Starting tonight, Chicago's downtown will be lit up with red lights to honor Juneteenth. The lights will stay up through Saturday. The Chicago Bears could become the new owners of Arlington International Racecourse. Bears president and CEO Ted Phillips confirmed today that the team submitted a bid for the 326-acre property, saying, quote, "It's our obligation to explore every possible option to ensure we're doing what's best for our organization and its future. If selected, this step allows us to further evaluate the property and its potential." But Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot isn't sold on the idea, saying, quote, "This is clearly a negotiating tactic that the Bears have used before. As a season ticket holder and longtime Bears fan, I am committed to keeping the Chicago name in our football team." Arlington Park's parent company, Churchill Downs, put the property up for sale back in February. The deadline for developers to submit proposals for the nearly 100-year-old racecourse was Tuesday. No set date on when Churchill will announce its decision. The Bears, meanwhile, are locked into a lease at Soldier Field until 2033. Nurses, social workers, and other employees who work for Cook County Health are planning a one-day strike. The workers are protesting what they say is a staffing shortage. The strike is set to be held on June 24th if there's no movement at the negotiating table by then. Contract negotiations between Cook County Health and the nurses began in October, but the National Nurses Organizing Committee, which represents registered nurses, says the county has engaged in bad faith bargaining. Okay, so we're headed to the suburbs now, and so are many of you if housing sales are a good indicator. For this week's Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series, our Amanda Vinicky and producer Marissa Nelson spent the day in West Suburban Lisle. Amanda joins us now from the Morton Arboretum. Amanda.
Yeah, Branda's houses are hot in the western suburbs, including in Lisle, which is near a metro stop, also 355 and I-88. Now, Lisle Mayor Chris Pisak, he grew up here. He just won re-election to another 4-year term, and he's staying put.
Lisle is the best of everything. It's small enough that you know everybody around town. It's big enough that you can find whatever you need within the vicinity. It's close enough that you can work with throughout the Chicagoland area.
Now, realtor and broker Debbie Polowitz is witnessing that stampede to the suburbs firsthand. She says city dwellers who spent the pandemic working remotely and who plan to continue to do so realize that they can live anywhere. And so why not have some place where they can spread out, have more space, a yard even. And plus, record low interest rates. Well, Polowitz says that things got busy in April of last year and haven't really slowed down.
So we immediately had this frenzied market. People were falling all over themselves to get houses. That's when you would see all the crazy offers and contingencies that were being waived and people selling their souls to get some homes.
She says that some homes are getting 10 offers, and of course only one buyer can actually get the house. So that means that you've got another 9 people still looking. Rose Galloway, she's on the opposite end. Her family had been planning to sell their house and move out of state next year after their daughter finished high school. Instead, with home prices so high, they didn't want to risk the market, and so they sold this spring. They just closed last week.
It was a very emotional discussion, and obviously if you're in a home for 20 years, which is what we were in our home, there's a lot of memories, there's a lot of history, and it's really hard to leave. But as a family, we decided this is something we wanted to do, and we felt that this was, if we're going to do it, this would be the best time to do it.
The Galloways are living in an apartment in Lisle while their dream home is built. She is hoping that that higher selling price of their Lisle home will help to even things out because the price of lumber is up too. So much so that that home build, it's costing $75 more a square foot than the original estimate. Now, the pandemic has also brought about a shortage in steel and labor, and those are things that have been noticed by the owner of the North America Pizza and Culinary Academy, and yes, that is based in Lisle.
Now some of the residential made with steel, huge steel shortage. So they're having a hard time keeping up production. Demand has been huge. Everyone's staying at home still, and they're doing their backyards up, and everybody wants a pizza oven in the backyard now.
You can learn to make pizza at the Academy, all kinds, Neapolitan, deep dish, stuffed. The business is approaching its 3rd year, and in some regards, the pandemic has been tough going because businesses stopped holding corporate development pizza workshops like they used to. But then again, pizza has been a popular pandemic meal, and so that has helped. The Academy also does consulting for restaurants. They are working now with a Swedish one that wants to put a Scandinavian spin on pizza dough, and the Academy can do that from their temperature-controlled dough room. Now, maybe you don't want to go out to eat, but you're also sick of all of that hassle and cleanup of COVID cooking. That is where Dinner Ready comes in. The menu's ever rotating, so that keeps things fresh, literally and metaphorically, both for customers and for chef and owner Chris Marks, who opened his storefront in April and hopes that as people get back to post-pandemic life, they find his heat and eat meals as convenient now as they have been these past few months.
The pandemic probably helped us to start off with, as well as far as, people not wanting to get out there and have those cuisines that they love. They could bring it home, and they could still get all the flavor profiles that they're looking for. They could get all the flavors that they're looking for, the seasonings they're looking for, and they don't have to actually go to a dining room and tip the waiter, pay for parking, whatever the case might be, and they can have that cuisine in their own home.
Also relatively new to Lisle, a new Park District playground, but this is intentionally built to be inclusive of people of all ages and abilities. So, for example, it has slides that have different textures for those with sensory issues, and then paths and playground equipment that are specially designed for, say, somebody in a wheelchair.
Based on your abilities or disabilities, doesn't matter. You're able to access the playground fully, and there's a lot more detail that go into it. If you can't make it quite to the top, there's play features at the bottom. Once you get in and are discovering everything that there is, it just facilitates and fosters fun play and safe play for everyone.
Well, people were able to enjoy the park for really the last year of the pandemic. last summer, the Park District pool was closed. Not anymore. And I got to tell you, it was hot today. I was ready to take a dip. Even so, the water slides and some of the other pool equipment are not open. And yes, that is due to COVID, but not necessarily for a reason that you may assume. Rather, it is because Park District programs had to be canceled again all last summer and throughout the pandemic, even though they are back on now. And so the superintendent says that revenues are really down, so keeping some of that equipment shut off, well, that is a money-saving venture. Though, all in all, Lyle has fared pretty well throughout COVID. The mayor says that the latest report of sales tax receipts was from March, and that was Lyle's third highest grossing month. December, the 5th highest ever in Lyle. And he says that was helped in part by special programs like expanded outdoor dining. And then there is an exception to that. However, Lyle does have several hotels, and those have been struggling. Now, speaking of comebacks, however, because the mayor is hoping that the hotels make one, Lyle is going to be hosting its traditional 4th of July parade coming up. It was canceled last year, at least mostly. The mayor says that Lyle didn't want to not commemorate any holiday, and so throughout the pandemic, they held convoys. So instead of people going to a parade, well, it came to the people. We'll have more on Lyle coming up, but tossing it back to you guys.
Very clever. Lots of action in Lyle. Thank you, Amanda. And now to Phil Ponce and the impact of inflation on the economy. Phil.
Brandis, the U.S. Federal Reserve has revised its forecast for inflation, predicting that core inflation, which does not include the cost of food or gas, could rise to 3.4% by year's end. Fed Chair Jerome Powell says while the economy is growing strongly, it is still down 7 million jobs as a result of the pandemic. He also expressed his concern that inflation could become an issue going forward. Here's a little of what he had to say.
The process of reopening the economy is unprecedented, as was the shutdown at the onset of the pandemic. As the reopening continues, shifts in demand can be large and rapid, and bottlenecks, hiring difficulties, and other constraints could continue to limit how quickly supply can adjust, raising the possibility that inflation could turn out to be higher and more persistent than we expect.
Joining us now to unpack what the Fed chair had to say is Martin Eichenbaum. He's professor of economics at Northwestern University, where he is also co-director of the Center for International Macroeconomics. Professor, thanks so much for joining us. First of all, as we mentioned, the Fed had a two-day meeting earlier this week. What was it that economists, such as yourself, were expecting might come out of that meeting?
Well, thanks. It's a pleasure to be on the show. We are all looking for how the Fed is parsing the signals of a rapidly evolving environment. How are they weighing the risks of on slow recovery versus too strong a recovery? What do I mean by too strong? A recovery that triggers an outburst of inflation. And they delivered on that promise and giving us insights into their ongoing thoughts about that process.
And what do you think those thoughts are? Where do you think the Fed and the Fed chairman think the economy is right now?
I think they think the recovery is stronger than they thought, say, in March. So if you just look at their forecast, so they are somewhat surprised by the growth of the economy. And at the same time, they are obviously surprised at the strength of inflation. And by the way, when I say surprise, that's not pejorative in any way. The data change, they react to it. And so I think those are the two things. Growth is good, that's the good news. And inflation is higher than they thought a couple months ago.
What is driving that inflation? Is there a direct relationship between growth and inflation, say?
Well, I think if you look at the short run, there's tremendous growth in demand for which we're all very happy as people are starting to, emerge from their shells. We've seen all sorts of shortages, some of which are due to peculiar circumstances, chips in cars, all sorts of things like that, which will cure themselves. But there's no question that as we hit the limits of our ability to produce the output and the goods that people want, firms are going to do what firms do, which is raise prices as they try and allocate relatively scarce goods amongst, people who want them.
We just heard the report from Amanda from Lyle, and she talked about how it is such a strong seller's market. The prices of homes are shooting up. She talked about how some sellers get as many as 10 offers. Is that part of the inflation equation, what's happening in the housing market?
You know, I'm not so sure about that. I do think what's true is that interest rates are very low still. So mortgage rates are pretty low. People have built up an awful lot of wealth. Not everyone. I mean, I understand there's winners and losers. But if you actually look at savings of consumers, the stock market wealth, there's a lot of people who, thank God, right, their wealth is really up. They would like to move up to nicer homes. I think the COVID has caused a lot of people to reassess where they want to live, how they want to live. And you take all those forces, basic economics, people reevaluating life, they want homes, and they're bidding on them.
Getting back to the Fed, how much of this approach is improvisation on the part of the Fed? Are they kind of making things up as they go along?
Sure, but let me be clear what I mean by that. It is a great virtue of Jerome Powell that he's not dogmatic, right? I mean, people talk about FDR and, as if in the end he was the same FDR as he was in the beginning. Now, I'm not saying Jerome Powell is FDR, but it is a virtue that when decision makers are responsive to policy and a little bit humble in what they know or don't know. So the Fed has a basic paradigm through which they view the world, but there's a lot within that paradigm that they go, sure, people are richer, they're going to spend more. How much more? If output grows quickly, inflation's going to pick up, but how much? So I think, yeah, in the sense that they're looking at data and responding to it, you could characterize that as making it up as you go along, but that could be a good or a bad. My own view is that's a good.
We have lived in a low interest rate, low inflation economy for so long that it's possible that some people have forgotten what the real danger of inflation is. Give us a Inflation 101, why it's a bad thing, why it can be a bad thing.
Well, let me give you an example. First of all, I believe, and I think most economists believe, inflation is a viciously regressive tax. What do I mean by that? Imagine that you're a worker on a fixed salary, as many workers are, and inflation goes up. That's the same as if I cut your wage, right? If everything costs 2% more, it's as if I cut your wage by 2%. If inflation goes up by 10%, it's if you got a 10% pay cut. And inflation is the gift that keeps on giving. So when it's 2, 3, 4, 5% a year, that over a couple of years, you've taken a huge cut to your salary. That just means you have less resources to buy food for your family, pay the rent, pay for a mortgage. Another example is mortgages. I'm probably about your age, and when I got my first house at Pittsburgh when I was teaching at Carnegie Mellon, mortgage rates were 18%.
Oh yeah. So, that was our first mortgage too. Absolutely. It was terrifying.
That's absolutely terrifying. And if you're a young person starting off, that is an incredible burden to bear. So, will mortgage rates go up if inflation goes up? Of course. If I'm going to lend you money and inflation's going up, before I agree to lend you that money, I want compensation. So for all the young people out there, if you're going to buy a house, in the future, you want to hope that inflation is low so that mortgage rates are low.
Martin Eichenbaum, some real-world consequences of the dangers that the Fed is addressing. Thank you so much for your insights. We appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And before I toss it back to you, Brandis, some personal news that some of you may already know. In recent years, I've been hosting segments 2 nights a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But at the end of this month, I will be making my last regular appearance on Chicago Tonight. This after 27 years or so of being either a reporter, the host of the program, or anchoring segments. But I won't be retiring completely. Instead, I will be back occasionally when the show needs an extra hand or to fill in on Saturday's Chicago Tonight Latino Voices. Working here has been the honor of my lifetime, and I'm glad it's not quite over yet. Now, Brandis, back to you.
And Phil, congratulations on, turning the page into this next chapter. You have been a mentor and a newsroom leader over the years and meant a lot to many of us, obviously. And there's so much to be said about, the influence that you've had in shaping the show into what it is today in those 27 years. So to say that you will be missed, it's an understatement, obviously. And before we move on, because obviously there will be time down the road to give you all of your flowers and celebrate those 27 years. But why now?
Well, it's such a cliche when you hear people say that they know when it's time, and I know that it's time. Carol Marine said something when she stepped back last year, and she said that you want to leave when you're still loving what you're doing, and hopefully when you're still doing a decent job at what you're doing. So this is my choice. It feels right in terms of where I am in life, what's going on with my family, the good things that are going on in my family, thank God. So it's timing. Timing is intuitive, but I intuit that the time is right.
More time with the grandkids, Phil. We wish you the best of luck. Thank you so much. We'll see you later.
Thank you so much, Brandis.
And there's much more ahead on the program, including Virtue Restaurant's Chef Eric Williams on what the Juneteenth holiday means to him. But first, a portrait is a traditional way of commemorating a presidency. But former President Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama made a statement by choosing distinctive contemporary artists. This week, Chicago becomes the first city outside Washington, D.C. to host the Obama portraits. Producer Mark Vitale has a preview.
They're really recasting what a presidential portrait can be. These are enduringly contemporary portraits. These are works of contemporary art. It's not documentation. These are artworks, and I think that's why we're seeing them in the galleries here at the Art Institute.
In the summer of 1989, the museum was the site of the Obama's first date. Now their very modern portraits hang in the modern wing. The life-size likeness of former President Barack Obama was painted by artist Kehinde Wiley. The portrait of former First Lady Michelle Obama was painted by artist Amy Sherald.
Kehinde Wiley and Amy Sherald were a bold choice, and that's for many reasons. Both artists, they really take portraiture to really another level. They really sort of shift the terms of engagement of, who is being portrayed in a portrait. They are vivid, they're experimental, they're conceptual, they are, everything that really defines, 21st century contemporary art. And the Obamas are champions of contemporary art, so they knew what they were getting themselves into.
Presidential portraits tend toward traditional interpretations with few exceptions. The Obamas personally chose the artists to paint their portraits and sat for the paintings, which were unveiled in February 2018. They are the first presidential portraits painted by black artists. In the president's portrait, flowers represent different moments of his life. Included are chrysanthemums, the official flower of Chicago.
And it sort of creates a reflection on what does it mean to even sit for a portrait and sort of the histories of power ingrained in that gesture and that posture. And yes, he's leaning forward and there's a direct gaze. He's looking right at you. And as much as it's almost photorealistically rendered, it's also incredibly surreal. It's like he's floating.
There's also symbolism at play in Amy Sherald's portrait of the First Lady. The patterns in her dress are reminiscent of African-American quilt-making traditions.
What she's done is really render her in a graceful state, in a state of dignity, but also, again, and I can't emphasize this enough, one that is also so generous, inviting, and inclusive.
Chicago is the first stop in a 5-city tour of the presidential portraits, which are on loan from the Smithsonian's National Gallery of Art.
As Amy Sherald has said, she paints American people, and black American people become presidents and first ladies. So it fits within her practice, while also both portraits really becoming a radical shift in what we know as presidential portraiture.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
The Obama Portraits exhibition opens tomorrow at the Art Institute of Chicago and will be on view through August 15th. You can visit us online to find out more. Up next, COVID-19's impact on DuPage County. Stay with us. And now we check back in with Amanda Vinicky. She spent the day reporting in Lisle as part of our In Your Neighborhood series, and she joins us again from the Morton Arboretum. Amanda.
Yes, Brandis, I am here with Sam Tornatore. He is a member of the DuPage County Board and president of the DuPage County Board of Health. Thank you so much for joining us. Could you just begin by telling us, how has DuPage County fared during COVID?
Well, we are the #1 county in the state in terms of COVID vaccinations, and we have been known to be the healthiest county in the state, so we're very proud of that. Our vaccine rollout has been very successful. We've vaccinated over 1 million people, about half of which are DuPage County residents, and the other half are from other counties who either work here and live somewhere else, or came out here because we had that available. So,
to what do you attribute that success, that high rate of vaccination?
A remarkable staff at the DuPage County Health Department. They have been amazing in terms of working 24/7, putting a system together, not only to reach out to people, but then ultimately facilitate the vaccines.
How did eligibility for getting a vaccine, particularly maybe early on, play a role?
It was very difficult because people all wanted the vaccine, and originally it was 65 and older, or people with underlying conditions, or healthcare professionals. And how do you determine who an essential worker was? We would have people who would suggest that they're as essential as the next person. And where you lived was important also. If you were from an economically disadvantaged area that might have more COVID than others, were those people given preferential treatment, or should they have been because they had it? So it was a daily push and pull with not only the health department, but our residents as well.
Now that vaccinations have opened up to, of course, all adults as well as to some youth, there are still, however, 1 million people vaccinated, awesome, but a whole lot of those who are not yet. What is the DuPage County Board of Health doing to try and convince people to get that shot in the arm? What sort of efforts are you up to?
Well, even with our success, there's approximately 200,000 eligible people in the county who have not yet been vaccinated. We're working on our Shot DuPage movement forward to try to get as many people not only vaccinated, but to understand what it means. We have approximately 150 places where you can get a vaccination within the county, be it a grocery store or a pharmacy or a healthcare place. The DuPage County Fairgrounds is open free. It's a walk-in, essentially. You don't have to make an appointment any longer. If you're immobile and you can't leave your home, we have worked with community services as well as fire departments to go to individual people's homes. You can have a vaccination festival at your village if you want to. Any more than 10 or more people, we'll send somebody out to your village hall or to your place of employment and get your people vaccinated. So we're reaching out to as many people as possible.
Any thoughts on Governor J.B. Pritzker today unveiled plans for a vaccination lottery? People, can get a prize if you get the shot. Thoughts on that?
I would have thought that incentivizing people to get vaccines was something that probably wasn't in anybody's mind when people were driving to Champaign and Indiana to get a vaccine just a few months ago. But quite frankly, if it helps people get vaccinated and eradicates the virus, I'm all for it.
And then finally, what are your thoughts? Is the pandemic done? I mean, as of June 11th, Illinois is open. Have any insight as to how that has gone, or thoughts for the summer? Are we through this?
I don't know that it's gone. I think we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's no longer the freight train. So what we're hoping now is that people will continue to get vaccinated, still be somewhat cognizant of being socially distanced when necessary, and use good sense, especially with so many people still unvaccinated. So we're getting there, but we haven't quite gotten there yet.
We really appreciate you sharing your insight with us. Once again, that was Sam Tornatore. He is president of the DuPage County Board of Health. Back to you, Brandis.
Amanda, thanks. We'll see you again in a little bit. And also to come on Chicago Tonight, award-winning chef Eric Williams on the significance of Juneteenth and honoring Black contributions to American cuisine. Geoffrey Baer on the latest additions to Chicago's ever-growing skyline in an all-new Ask Geoffrey. And as historic Chicago record label Alligator Records celebrates 50 years, we revisit our conversation with a young blues prodigy. But first, some more of today's top stories. Mayor Lori Lightfoot declares racism a public health crisis, vowing to redouble the city's efforts to erase disparities exacerbated by the pandemic. The mayor and public health officials point to the life expectancy gap between Chicagoans. Black residents die more than 9 years sooner than other residents, according to a recent report from Chicago's Public Health Department. Officials say they've selected 6 organizations to lead efforts vaccinating residents against COVID-19 and to address long-term health issues like access to routine medical care and social services. There's much more of this story on our website. If you are vaccinated against COVID-19, you could win $1 million. Governor J.B. Pritzker announces that every Illinois resident who has gotten at least 1 dose of the vaccine can win up to $1 million in cash or $150,000 in college scholarships. Pritzker emphasized the importance of getting vaccinated at a press conference today.
This might be a lottery, but COVID-19 is not a game. In the past 24 hours, we received reports of 16 additional deaths due to COVID-19. In 2020, in the year 2020, more Illinoisans died from COVID-19 than from strokes and accidents combined. With a vaccine widely available and free, it doesn't have to be that way.
And residents who have received the dose will automatically be entered into the lotteries through the Illinois Department of Public Health. And Chicagoans can now get vaccinated while they're on the go. The Chicago Department of Public Health is teaming up with the Chicago Transit Authority to provide COVID vaccines at select CTA stations every Monday and Friday. Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson vaccines will be offered at CTA buses outside of the train stations. All COVID-19 vaccines are offered at no cost and no insurance or ID is required. To find CTA vaccine locations, you can visit chicago.gov/vaxcalendar. Saturday is Juneteenth, the day celebrating the emancipation of enslaved African Americans. This afternoon, the federal government joined Chicago and Illinois in recognizing it as a holiday.
National holidays are something important. These are days when we as a nation have decided to stop and take stock, and often to acknowledge our history.
With the holiday gaining wider recognition, what significance does it hold for Black Americans? And how do they try to honor its legacy through their work? Joining us now to talk about this is Eric Williams, executive chef and owner of the restaurant Virtue in Hyde Park, who's been recognized by the Michelin Guide and the James Beard Awards, among many others. He's also a 2020 recipient of the Mayor's Medal of Honor. Chef, welcome to Chicago tonight. So, as we mentioned, Juneteenth, it's getting wider recognition in recent years, this past year especially. What significance does this holiday hold for you?
Well, first, thanks so much for having me on. I think it holds a lot of significance, and it's very personal for me. We're in 2021, and we are still fighting the battle of having access to capital in African-American communities and in communities of color abroad. Why that means so much to me is because once the news hit Texas, then the slaves had nowhere to go. And so we are making forward strides in terms of creating our own narratives, sharing those narratives, which gives me a lot of hope in our ability to communicate both in our communities and abroad. However, we are still in a space where we have to continue to put pressure on banks and institutions that provide opportunities, because it doesn't do us any good if we're free and we have nowhere to go.
Obviously, you know, the slaves or the enslaved people in Galveston at the time learning about the end of the Civil War and that they had been freed, you know, it's a matter of access to, they didn't have information and resources then. And you've talked about how in your industry there's also, there are barriers to information and resources. How do you try to remove some of those barriers?
I think it's centered around dialogue. You know, as an entrepreneur, or chef owner, however you like to fashion that, it's becoming increasingly important for me to trade notes with fellow operators, get a better understanding of things that I don't know, share information about things that I'm very savvy about, because we're all fighting an uphill battle. being a small business is a very tough endeavor. And I think the world has seen that over the last 13 months.
You've also received, as we mentioned, the Medal of Honor from the mayor. How do you hope to use that platform?
Well, I'm going to use that platform the same way I use any platform, with a great sense of humility and with a lot of purpose. We didn't open Virtue by mistake. Our restaurant it stands on the shoulders of its very definition, and that is of high moral standard. And and we use the two borders to encompass that moral standard, being kindness and hospitality. And so we take people in, we satiate them, and we make sure that people have the opportunity to see dignity, intelligence, and ingenuity throughout our space on a night-to-night basis. We feel good about that, and it is extremely disarming. Once we're able to feed people, then we're able to get them to hear our story.
We've obviously been through an enormously difficult year, restaurants especially. How did Virtue respond in this past year?
Well, we responded in many ways. One of the ways that's most talked about is our commitment to taking care of first responders via healthcare workers. We sent tens of thousands of meals out to local hospitals, predominantly the University of Chicago, to make sure that both the morale was lifted and to let our first responders know that they matter to us. We've all endured an incredibly challenging year, and it's important to us to both be a part of the community, but also to be supportive of the community.
You also, of course, as you mentioned, you were able to stay open when many restaurants sadly had to close. Why was it important for you to stay open, especially for your staff?
Well, it's another scenario where our people had nowhere to go. Unemployment offices were overwhelmed, and we just felt like the best use of our time would be to work through the confusion that was going on at the onset of the pandemic and the close downs. And so what we did is we stabilized our business. We made sure that we could operate at a break even. And part of the revenues that we brought in, we supported our team members with by way of forgivable loans. And that has worked out very, very well for us. It has been a huge investment and a lot of loyalty and Thanksgiving on the side of the community and our team members. And, we're just grateful that it all worked out.
Of course, as we mentioned, Juneteenth is getting a lot more recognition. And there are many ways in which, blacks and the African-American contribution to American culture has been overlooked. How do you try to combat that through the food that you serve at Virtue?
Well, I think when you have the opportunity to provide a meal for someone, food is the great equalizer. And so it offers a level of trust. It offers a level of care and a level of service. And we take all of those things very, very seriously. And we continue, again, to use our platform to spread the word as far as we can. I think, many people are saying now, wow, I didn't know that happened in Texas. Wow, why haven't I heard the story before? And for the African-American community, we've become accustomed to our stories not being told. And so we take these moments to really stabilize, to pivot, and to push forward not just this message, but the many messages that have been lost or buried over the years.
And before I let you go, what more do you think needs to happen to be sure that people are educated about the history of African Americans?
I think, again, that we need to continue to spread the word. We need to continue to celebrate the contributions that blacks have made both for and in this country. But I think more than anything, our Constitution encompasses this ideal of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, with liberty being a pretty big word. And so until all of our fellow Americans are in a position where liberty rings, we're going to continue to have struggles. So I think, the promotion of liberty, the promotion of life, and the promotion of the pursuit of happiness will probably be at the top of my agendas and will continue to be as we advocate for people both near and far.
Okay. Chef Eric Williams of Virtue, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And now we check back in with Amanda Vinicky. She spent the day reporting in Lisle as a part of our In Your Neighborhood series. She's coming to us tonight from the Morton Arboretum. Amanda.
Yes, Brandis, the day in downtown Lisle, but this evening, this gorgeous summer night here at the Morton Arboretum, which has a new exhibit, Human Nature. And here to talk about it with us is the Morton Arboretum's Sarah Sargent. Thank you so very much. So right behind us is a sculpture by South African artist Daniel Popper. Can you explain, first of all, what is this made of and what is it?
This is Daniel's conception. We talked to him in 2019 about coming here and doing some works that would kind of resonate with various landscapes, places he found beautiful. And so he riffed on the idea of humans and nature being interconnected. So they're all a little evocative, a little symbolic, and they're all beautifully textured. They look like wood, but they're made out of concrete.
Made out of concrete, so people can touch it and interact.
Absolutely.
And this comes after a wildly successful troll exhibit as well. How big are these trolls and sculptures?
The largest of Daniel's sculptures is about 26 feet tall. That's the one by Meadow Lake, and that's about the same height as the trolls. So they're neck to neck.
All right, and there are 5 of these throughout the Morton Arboretum's property, which is
1,700 acres.
1,700 acres, so quite large. We're focusing on the sculpture, but there are also some beautiful trees surrounding it. Those are oaks?
They're about 100-year-old oaks, yeah. This is a place where the Morton Arboretum likes to conserve oaks and pay attention to oaks. They're really important in Illinois. And so for me, this is really evocative because Daniel set them in front of some of our favorite trees.
And of course, protecting and preserving trees is part of the Morton Arboretum's mission. What advice do you have, or what do you perhaps want to share with our viewers at this time where I think we're going to be getting some rain soon, but by and large, a lot of Illinois is in a drought?
Yes, well, trees need water. So if you have a tree on your property, the best thing you can do is water it. If you have questions, you can call or email our plant clinic, and they will talk you through any specifics about the type of species you have in your yard.
It's a free plant clinic. How often, I know this isn't really your thing, but how often should you be watering a tree? I mean, if it rains tonight, are we good?
If I had a tree, I would call the plant clinic.
You would call the plant clinic. Now, can you speak to, during the pandemic, people couldn't interact, go to the theater, eat inside, really go to bars, but they could be outside. What did the pandemic look like here on the grounds of the Morton Arboretum?
We had to close briefly, but then we were able to reopen. And so I think people found that it was a real respite, a real solace to be outside. And so we actually had one of our most successful early springs ever because people really needed to get out and see nature, and that's been great.
Thank you so very much to the Morton Arboretum's Sarah Sargent, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I'm guessing with the new exhibit it will be a popular summer here as well. Back to you, Brandis.
I see what you did there, Amanda. Thank you. Stay dry. Up next, details of new downtown architecture in an all-new Ask Geoffrey.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part through the generous support of the Julius Frankel Foundation.
You may have been stuck at home for the past 15 months, but the city's ever-growing skyline didn't skip a beat. New buildings have sprouted up all over downtown Chicago, including some projects that might surprise you. Geoffrey Baer joins us now for a tour of what we might have missed in tonight's Ask Geoffrey. Geoffrey, good to see you again. I don't know when the last time you went to the Loop was, but I don't know how many of these buildings were a surprise for you as well.
Totally a surprise in some cases, absolutely.
So this question comes from Evanston. It says, I just started going into the Loop again and was amazed at all the new buildings. Can you do an overview of some recent projects that were finished during the pandemic?
Well, I certainly can. And, you know, it feels a little bit like many of us during the pandemic were sort of in suspended animation. So these buildings seem to have gone up in a blink of an eye. Let's start out with one that's very hard to miss. It's the St. Regis Chicago, formerly known as Vista Tower, by acclaimed Chicago architect Jeannie Gang. You probably know Jeannie Gang for the St. Regis's neighbor tower called Aqua, with its undulating balconies. The soaring St. Regis, with its zigzag profile inspired by a natural crystalline form called a frustrum, is the third tallest building in Chicago, and it's also the world's tallest building designed by a woman. One curious detail you'll notice is the 83rd floor. It's completely empty and open to the elements. That's because it's known as a blow-through floor, and it was added to the building's design to reduce sway in the structure after wind tunnel tests on a model of the building.
So another huge development is down the river at Wolf Point. What's the latest on that project?
Right. So Wolf Point is the confluence of the three branches of the Chicago River, north, south, and in the main branch. Today, it's just west of the Merchandise Mart. Over the past decade, it's been totally transformed from a surface parking lot by three sleek towers, two of which are new since the pandemic. The 60-story Wolf Point East was completed last year, and it's home to almost 700 residential units and a soaring office building at the center of the complex, which is set to be completed in early 2023, is known as Salesforce Tower, after the tech company that will be the main tenant. Both of these new towers are designed by Clark Pelly of New Haven, which also did the site plan. Another super tall project, you can see it from the expressway. It's nearing completion. It's called One Chicago, and it's right across the street from Holy Name Cathedral on the near north side, so way on the other side from the expressway, but it's so tall. The residential complex includes two towers, 49 and 76 stories respectively, designed in partnership by Getch Partners and Hartshorne and Plunkard Architects. And they're connected at the base by retail and office space, with tenants expected to move in later this year. Getch Partners also designed a high-profile new tower on the Chicago River's South Branch. 110 North Wacker is partly supported by gigantic metal trees or tridents to open up the base for a river walk. Getch has done dramatic things like this at the bases of several of his recent buildings. For example, right across the river at 150 North Riverside, which opened a few years ago, that building sort of seems to come to a point at the bottom. And then there's also another building from a few years ago, 111 South Wacker by Getch, where the ceiling of the lobby is the underside of the spiral ramp to the parking garage.
Always impressed with architecture in Chicago. But of course, not every new addition downtown is actually a new building.
Oh, right. Yes. There's one that you won't see from Lakeshore Drive, the extensively renovated base of the Sears, Willis Tower. Over the past few years, the building's lobby and ground levels have undergone a complete overhaul by architecture firm Gensler, featuring a soaring atrium and new entranceways, plus shops, restaurants, and an outdoor green space. It's all designed to connect the building more with the street instead of it being a fortress as it once was. And as part of that whole project, there's a really eye-catching new piece of public art along Jackson Street by Icelandic and Danish artist Olafur Eliasson. It's inspired by waves on Lake Michigan. And then the $800 million transformation of the old post office, the old Chicago post office, into 2.5 million square feet of office space is finished. And it includes a 3.5-acre rooftop park, complete with a running track. Now, that park is only open to the building's tenants, but it can be rented for special events, Brandis, so keep that in mind. These are just really a few of the transformations that you'll notice when you return to the Loop this summer for work or for pleasure. And by the way, if you cast your gaze in the other direction, that is out to sea, you'll see the new Sable Hotel at the east end of Navy Pier, which I would argue has really improved the look of the pier when you view it from the south. It's being marketed as the first hotel ever being built on top of Lake Michigan. Oh, and one final note before we go. we recently did a story on the search for a Chicago anthem back in the 1980s. And after the story aired, the winner of the contest, Jeff Jacobs, contacted us and gave us a recording of his anthem. And contrary to what I reported, Jacobs also told us that he did, in fact, received the prize money after a year of, quote, wrangling with the city. You can listen to his song on our website, and it is well worth it.
Tough to get money out of the city, isn't it? But that's great that, that he reached out to us and that he actually did get the prize money from the city. All right, Geoffrey Bear, thanks so much as always.
My pleasure.
And you can visit our website for more details about new buildings downtown. And while you're there, don't forget to submit your own question to Geoffrey Bear. That's at WTTW.com/AskGeoffrey. Chicago's Alligator Records is celebrating 50 years of what it calls genuine house rockin' music. Here's another look at one of its young stars, Christone Kingfish Ingram. Buddy Guy himself called Kingfish the next explosion of the blues when he was still a teenager. Here's Paris Schutz with another look.
The guitar prodigy and his band arrived for an afternoon sound check. At Shuba's Tavern, the star of the show isn't old enough to have a drink, but this 20-year-old can uncork the blues. Christone Ingram hails from Clarksdale, Mississippi, the legendary crossroads of the blues. He took classes at the Delta Blues Museum, where an instructor gave him the nickname Kingfish. And he credits PBS with fostering his interest in music.
I remember when I was younger, maybe 5, my dad showed me a PBS documentary on Muddy Waters. And he said, one of these days I'm gonna take you to the Blues Museum, to show you. And so he took me one day.
And I believe these blues are never gonna go away.
In Mississippi, all of my uncles, aunts, they preach, they sing in the choir, all of them lead, and all of them play instruments. They were a big influence on me as well when I was younger. My mom was always taking me to gospel programs, and I was going to quartet programs and watching the quartet groups and getting up there with them with my guitar and mimicking, but not really know what I'm doing. So yeah, man, my family and church was like my first influence.
When he's not on the road, Kingfish works with United by Music North America and performs with people who have developmental challenges. Growing up in Mississippi, he loved all kinds of music, but he fell for the blues while his peers were into hip-hop.
Some thought it was funny. Well, they really thought it was funny. They was like, man, you young, but you listen to that old sad stuff. I'm like, man, I ain't really like that, man. I'm listening more for a culture thing. This is history. This birthed what you guys listen to today, because, rap is nothing but the blues grandchild.
Outside of this town.
Now he's released his long-awaited debut album, Kingfish, on Chicago's independent blues label, Alligator Records.
Christone has been the buzz of the blues world for the last 3 or 4 years. To play blues and sing blues with this level of authority and to come out of the blues heartland of Mississippi made him immediately a bit of a sensation.
He told us he loves to play Chicago, and he spoke about his hometown, Clarksdale.
Clarksdale, man, it's the blues mecca. You know how that is. It's really the home of the blues. It's blues all around. With the poverty and this, that, and the third. But as far as the music goes and cultural aspect, it's all around. Yeah, it's pretty much the blues holy land. That's what it is. That's what it's like.
When he was younger, he played a lot of notes, like a lot of younger players do. But by the time he turned 18, he began figuring out which the important notes were, the notes that tell the story. And now he tells a story with his guitar and his voice that's so grown up, you can't believe he's just turned 20 years old. It's thrilling to watch him grow as a musician, and he's just getting started.
I'm very grateful, for everybody who supported me and who's guided me to this point. I'm just riding the wave to see what the end's gonna be, man. I can't tell the future, but I can show up play my song. Who knows what might happen in the future, man? So I'm just riding the wave, man. Yeah.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Paris Schutz.
The city of Chicago is declaring tomorrow Alligator Records Day in honor of its 50th anniversary. And Christone Kingfish Ingram is due to release his second record on alligator next month. And by the way, he has turned 21 since that story first aired, so cheers to him. And that is our that's our show for this Thursday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night at 7 for the Weekend Review. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm serving Chicago for 37 years. This evening's presentation of Chicago Tonight is made possible